Hello everyone, welcome to my channel, and this is the second part of top 10 worst decisions ever made in human history. 5. Accepting the Trojan horse. It spelled such a decisive defeat for the Trojans that the term Trojan horse has come to be synonymous for any military strategy that tricks a target into allowing a foe into a secure space. As the story goes, Odysseus thought that he could trick the Trojans into letting a Greek force into the city by giving them a gift. So, in 3 days Odysseus and his men built a massive horse in which Odysseus and 30 of his best men hid inside. One man stayed outside the horse and the rest of the Greek army boarded a ship and sailed away. Once the Trojans accepted the horse, the Greeks waited until nightfall. Once darkness fell, the Greek ship sailed back and the men inside the Trojan horse emerged. They quickly overtook the Trojan guards and let the rest of the Greek army into the city. 6. Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward. The Great Leap Forward was a disastrous attempt in 1958 by Mao Zedong to rapidly industrialize China. He banned all private holdings and created communes where peasants who no longer owned their own land would live together in a field and would be forced to work steel instead of farming. Each farm would be given a steel furnace, and often every peasant in the commune was forced to work long hours. Mao also tried to improve farming through a number of misguided techniques set forth by Trofim Lysenko. The techniques decreased grain production, but local leaders were under so much pressure that they actually falsely reported large increases in grain production in order to please their superiors. These and other policies of the Great Leap Forward are believed to be responsible for the Chinese famine, which resulted in the deaths of millions of Chinese. Even as Mao knew his people were starving, he continued to export grain in order to save face, and some even claim he knew millions would die through his program, but he thought it was a worthwhile sacrifice. The economy also failed as the period of the Great Leap, 1958 to 1961. 7. Hitler invading Russia. It was a battle of giants, and the largest military invasion of World War II, Nazi Germany against Communist Russia. But the war between Germany and Russia would be the first major land defeat for Hitler, and that defeat is considered the beginning of the decline of Nazi Germany. In June 1941, Adolf Hitler broke the Non-Aggression Pact signed in 1939 by Germany and the Soviet Union when he invaded Russia with an army of more than 3 million men, 7,000 artillery pieces, 3,000 tanks, and 2,500 aircraft. Joseph Stalin, taken by surprise, found his military overwhelmed by the German onslaught. During the first week of the invasion there were 150,000 casualties among Soviet troops, and by October that year, German troops had taken 3 million Soviet prisoners of war. German troops reached Moscow by December 1941, but the war was taking longer than anticipated. When Soviet troops struck back hard to keep Moscow from falling, the Nazis failed to take Moscow. 8. Faulty equipment causes nuclear meltdown at 3 Mile Island. Due to an equipment malfunction, water meant for cooling uranium fuel burst from its containment chamber. 3 Mile Island is the worst nuclear accident in American history, which cost the loss of around $836.9 million in repairs and cleanup. However, no one was killed. 9. Berlin Conference 1884. The Berlin Conference was a bad decision made by just one world leader but by several. The conference was attended by major European powers and the United States in order to finalize the claims on African territories. It was a way to end the fighting between countries as they scrambled for territory on the resource-rich African continent. A map was drawn up to establish current colonies and to establish a framework that would allow for future negotiations of claims on the continent. The problem with the Berlin Conference was that it made no consideration for the people that lived in the colonies. Ethnic groups that had inhabited the same area now found themselves in different colonies and no longer able to cross the border. Migratory peoples found that they could no longer migrate their usual territories, and herders found themselves cut off from their pastureland. Not only were the borders problematic, but the Berlin Conference established the authority of European colonial powers to exploit the natural resources of their colonies for trade. For 60 years the continent existed solely for the benefit of the colonial powers, and once the colonies began achieving independence the borders drawn by the Europeans in 1884 remained the same. Tribal conflicts only continued after independence, as warring tribes were still forced to inhabit the same land and were often cut off from their ancestral lands. Today the bad blood between tribes still exists, and has led not only to discrimination within states but also very violent conflicts. Even more than a century later, many of the current problems in Africa today can be traced back to the exploitation of the colonial powers. 10. Alexander the Great refusing to name an heir. Alexander the Great was a great leader who built a substantial empire, however his last decision likely ended up being one of his worst. His empire brought together numerous powerful cultures and it was hard enough for a leader like Alexander to control. Therefore, it needed a powerful leader to keep it together, but as Alexander laid upon his deathbed and he was asked for the name of his successor, he refused to name one. Some accounts say that Alexander requested that his empire go to the strongest and others suggest that Alexander gave his signet ring to Perdiccas, who was his bodyguard and leader of the companion cavalry. This is suggested as a way for Alexander to choose his successor even though he was too ill at the time to speak. At the time Alexander had no living sons, but Roxanne was pregnant and Perdiccas hoped that the child would be male so that Alexander would have an heir. So, he held off taking power over Alexander's empire until the child was born. This arrangement did not suit Alexander's generals, who were left out of any discussion of succession and rivalries formed. Alexander's child did end up being male, Alexander IV, and he was declared heir to the empire with Perdiccas and Philip, Alexander's half-brother, ruling as regents until the child came of age. But this did not suit the generals, and so began a 40-year war between the generals who believed that they should have been chosen as successors. During the course of the War of the Successors, Perdiccas, Philip and Alexander IV were murdered. Thank you for watching this video, and if you found something helpful to you from this video, please make sure you subscribe and hit the bell for new upcoming videos. Wish you a healthy and happy life. Thanks.